Clara had been a flight attendant for 12 years, and she prided herself on staying calm no matter what happened in the sky. Turbulence, medical emergencies, even the occasional passenger who'd had one too many cocktails. She handled it all with a steady voice and a practiced smile. But tonight, something felt off from the moment she stepped onto the plane. It was a red-eye from New York to London, the kind of flight where everyone's running on fumes and patience wears thinner than the airline blankets. The cabin was unusually full for first class. Usually that section felt like a quiet lounge. Polished shoes, hushed conversations, people buried in noise-canceling headphones. But tonight there was a different kind of energy. Near the front, a man in a crisp navy suit sat with a small boy, maybe 4 years old, bouncing in his oversized seat. The child had bright eyes and a mop of curly hair, and he looked both excited and exhausted, like he'd been up way past his bedtime. His father kept glancing at his phone, typing fast, occasionally nodding at something on the screen, but never really looking at his son for more than a second. Clara noticed right away. She always did. Kids on planes weren't uncommon, but solo parents in first class with toddlers, that was rare. Most families with young children flew economy, where the seats were closer together and the expectations lower. First-class passengers paid for peace, for space, for silence. And this little boy, sweet as he seemed, was already kicking the seat in front of him. Softly at first, then harder when no one responded. She walked over with a warm smile. "Hi there," she said gently, crouching slightly so she was at the boy's eye level. "My name's Clara, what's yours?" "Leo," he whispered, then immediately pointed to the window. "Look, lights." His father finally looked up. "Sorry," he said quickly, voice low but distracted. "He's just overtired. Long day?" "No problem at all," Clara said, keeping her tone light. "We've got some coloring books and snacks if he'd like. And maybe a blanket to help him settle in." The man nodded absently, already tapping on his phone again. Clara handed Leo a small activity pack and tucked a soft blanket around his legs. The boy smiled, but within minutes he was up again, this time trying to crawl into the aisle. She gently guided him back, whispering, "Let's stay in our seat, okay? It's safer that way." For the next hour it was a quiet dance. Leo would calm down, then get restless. He'd ask for juice, spill it, cry a little, then laugh when Clara made a silly face to cheer him up. She didn't mind, it was part of the job. What bothered her was how little his father engaged. He'd pat Leo's head once in a while, but mostly he stayed buried in work, taking calls in hushed tones, typing furiously, never really stepping in when his son needed grounding. Then came the toy. It was a small plastic airplane, ironic, Clara thought, and Leo had been playing with it quietly for a while. But when his father ignored his 10th, "Daddy, look!" the boy's frustration boiled over. He hurled the toy down the aisle. It skidded across the carpet and nearly hit an older woman who flinched and muttered something under her breath. Clara moved fast. She picked up the toy, walked back, and knelt beside Leo again. "Hey," she said softly but firmly. "We don't throw things on the plane. Someone could get hurt." Leo stared at her, lip trembling. Then, without warning, he kicked her shin hard. She bit back a wince. Her shift had started 14 hours ago. She'd skipped lunch because of a delay. Her feet ached, her back was stiff, and now this, on a flight where every second of peace felt borrowed. She reached out instinctively, not thinking, and gave his hand a quick, sharp tap. More of a stop signal than a punishment, the kind of reflexive gesture a teacher or parent might make without meaning harm. "Leo," she said, voice low but urgent. "We don't kick people either." The moment it happened, she regretted it. The boy froze. His eyes widened, not with fear exactly, but with surprise, as if he couldn't believe someone had actually set a boundary. The cabin, which had been humming with the usual low murmur of conversation and engine noise, went eerily quiet. Even the man on the phone 2 rows back lowered his voice. Leo's father finally looked up, really looked up. His expression shifted from distracted to alert, then to something colder.
He didn't yell.
He didn't even speak. He just watched Clara, his gaze sharp and unreadable, her heart hammered. She forced a calm smile. "I'm so sorry," she said, this time to both of them. "Long flight. I didn't mean to startle you, Leo." She offered him a juice box from her cart, apple, his favorite, she remembered from earlier, and added a pack of animal crackers. "Truce?" Leo took the juice slowly, eyes still on her. After a beat, he nodded. She stood smoothing her uniform and walked back toward the galley. Her hands were shaking slightly. She told herself it was nothing, just a tired kid, a tired adult, a moment of poor judgment. But deep down she knew. In first class on an international flight, with passengers who paid thousands for perfection, even small missteps could echo loudly. She busied herself with refilling water carafes, checking inventory, anything to keep her hands moving and her mind off what just happened. But she kept glancing back at that seat. The father hadn't gone back to his phone. He was watching her now, not with anger, but with something worse, calculation. Later, during the drink service, she overheard another crew member whispering near the galley. "Did you see who that is? The guy with the kid?" "No," Clara said, trying to sound casual. "That's Daniel Reeves, CEO of Viridian Dynamics." Her stomach dropped like the plane had hit sudden turbulence. Viridian wasn't just some big company. It was one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. And more importantly, they had major partnerships with several airlines, including hers. Their executives flew constantly, and their feedback carried weight. A complaint from someone like him wouldn't just go into a file. It could follow her for years. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to focus. She still had hours left in this flight. She couldn't panic, not yet. But as she walked back down the aisle, offering warm towels and quiet smiles, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in the space of one exhausted, impulsive second. And the worst part? She knew she'd meant well. She'd only wanted to keep everyone safe, to maintain order, to do her job. But in the world of first class, good intentions didn't always matter as much as appearances. And right now she'd broken the unspoken rule. No matter how chaotic things got, the illusion of calm had to remain unbroken. Now, that illusion was cracked, and she had no idea how to fix it. The rest of the flight stretched like taffy, slow, sticky, and impossible to snap. Clara kept moving, kept smiling, kept offering drinks and checking seatbelts, but her mind was locked on that one moment. The tap, the silence after, the way the man's eyes had changed. She told herself it wasn't that bad. She hadn't hit the child, just a quick, firm stop. The kind any adult might use to keep a kid from running into traffic. But in the hushed, polished world of first class, even a raised voice felt like a siren. She avoided looking directly at their row, but she could feel their presence like a low hum in the air. Every time she passed, she made sure her steps were quiet, her movements smooth. Once she caught Leo watching her from under his blanket, juice box clutched in both hands. He didn't look scared, just curious, like he was trying to figure her out. She gave him the tiniest nod, and after a pause, he gave one back. That small exchange eased something in her chest just a little, but the father remained unreadable. He didn't complain, didn't call her over, didn't even ask for another drink. He just sat there working, glancing occasionally at his son, then back at his screen. And every so often his eyes would flick toward her, calm, steady, and sharp as glass. During a lull in service, Clara ducked into the galley to refill the snack baskets. That's when she overheard it. Two crew members were whispering near the coffee machine, voices low but urgent. "Didn't you recognize him? That's Daniel Reeves. No way. The Viridian guy? Yeah, saw his photo in the airline newsletter last month. They just signed that new partnership deal." Clara's hands froze around the bag of pretzels. Viridian didn't just partner with airlines. They influenced contracts, routes, even crew training programs. If Reeves filed a complaint, it wouldn't just go to her manager. It could land on the desk of someone who decided whether her base even kept international routes. Her stomach twisted. She'd worked too hard, flown through storms and delays and passenger meltdowns, to have her career derailed by one exhausted second. She took a slow breath and stepped out of the galley, forcing her posture straight. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to fix this, if it could be fixed. Over the next hour, she found small ways to reconnect. When Leo dropped his crayon, she picked it up and handed it back with a quiet, "Here you go, buddy." When he asked for more crackers, she brought an extra pack just in case. She didn't overdo it, no fake cheer, no desperate apologies. But she made sure every interaction was gentle, respectful, and calm. She wanted him to feel safe. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted his father to see that she wasn't the monster that one moment might have suggested. The man noticed. She could tell. Once, when she leaned in to adjust Leo's blanket, Their eyes met for a full 3 seconds. No anger, no accusation, just observation. It was worse than yelling. Yelling she could defend against. This quiet watchfulness, it felt like judgment being weighed. As the flight neared its final hour, the cabin lights dimmed further. Most passengers were asleep, wrapped in cashmere blankets, eye masks in place. But Reeves was still awake, laptop open, fingers tapping softly. Leo had finally drifted off, head tilted against the window, one hand still clutching his toy airplane. Clara did one last walkthrough, checking seatbelts, dimming stray reading lights. When she reached their row, she paused. The man looked up. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Yeah, he's fine now." There was no warmth in his voice, but no ice either. Just neutrality. And in that neutrality, she heard the door still open, just a crack. "Good," she said softly. "He's a sweet kid. Just had a long day." Another pause. Then almost reluctantly, he said, "We both did. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't a threat either." For the first time since the incident, she let herself hope it might end here with no report, no drama. Just two tired adults who'd both made mistakes. But hope, she knew, was fragile. When the plane touched down at Heathrow just after 7 a.m., the sky was gray and drizzling. Passengers stirred slowly, stretching, gathering belongings. Clara stood by the exit, offering quiet goodbyes and have a great days with practiced ease. Her smile felt stiff, but she held it. Reeves was among the last to leave. He carried Leo, now awake but drowsy, on his hip. As he passed, he met her eyes again. "Thank you," he said simply. She blinked. For trying," he said, and walked off without another word. She stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the jet bridge. Her chest felt tight. Was that it? Was it over? Back in the crew area, the mood was light. Everyone was tired but relieved the flight was done. Someone cracked a joke about British weather and laughter rippled through the group. Clara tried to join in, but her mind was elsewhere. Then her lead purser pulled her aside. "Got a minute?" Her stomach dropped again. They stepped into a quiet corner near the service closet. The purser's expression was serious but not angry. "I heard something happened up front." Clara's throat went dry. "It was nothing major. Leo got upset, threw a toy, kicked me. I reacted too quickly, tapped his hand to stop him. I apologized right after." The purser nodded slowly. "Okay, but I also heard who he was." Clara didn't respond. There was nothing to say. "Look," the purser continued, voice low, "if he files a complaint, it's not just about discipline. It's optics. Viridian's a key partner. We can't afford bad press, or worse, a contract review." "I know," Clara said quietly. "And I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. I believe you, but you need to file a self-disclosure today, full details. Better it comes from you than from him." She nodded, of course. That was standard procedure. Own your mistake before someone else defines it for you. She'd done it once before, years ago, when a passenger accused her of being rude. She'd just been enforcing a safety rule. Nothing came of it. But this felt different. Bigger. Back at the crew hotel, she sat on the edge of her bed, laptop open, staring at the airline's incident report form. She typed slowly, choosing each word with care. She didn't excuse what she'd done. She explained the context, the long shift, the child's escalating behavior, the father's absence. But she took full responsibility for her reaction. She wrote that she'd spoken to Leo afterward, that he seemed unharmed, that she regretted the moment deeply. She hit submit just before noon. Then she waited. The next 48 hours were a blur of layover routines, meals, sleep, walks around London to clear her head. But her mind kept circling back to that tap, that look, that whispered name, Daniel Reeves. She imagined emails flying between corporate offices, HR files being pulled, her record being scrutinized. 12 years of clean service reduced to one paragraph in a report. On the flight back to New York, she worked economy this time. Quieter, less pressure. But every time a child cried or a parent looked overwhelmed, her chest tightened. She helped where she could, offered extra snacks, a kind word, but she kept her distance too. She'd learned her lesson. It wasn't until she landed back home and checked her work email that the real weight settled in. Subject: formal passenger complaint. Flight 227. Her hands trembled as she opened it, but the complaint wasn't about the tap. It said the crew had failed to provide adequate support to a solo parent traveling with a young child. That the environment had been chaotic and unmanaged, causing distress to the minor. That the airline showed a lack of empathy and training in handling family needs in premium cabins. No mention of physical contact. No accusation of abuse, just negligence, relief, and dread crashed into her at once. He hadn't lied, but he'd framed it in a way that made the airline look bad, not her. And that was far more dangerous, because now the company wouldn't just be upset with her, they'd be furious that she'd put them in a position where a powerful client was questioning their standards. She closed the email and sat in the dark for a long time. The sky outside her window was clear. Planes took off in the distance, lights blinking like stars. Somewhere up there, another crew was dealing with their own version of chaos, and she wondered, was this just part of the job? Or had she finally crossed a line she couldn't uncross? All she knew was this: the flight was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The days after the flight blurred together in a haze of waiting and worry. Clara tried to keep to her routine: grocery shopping, laundry, watering the plants on her tiny balcony. But her mind kept drifting back to that email. The complaint hadn't accused her of anything violent, but it had painted a picture of failure, of an airline that didn't care enough to support families, even in first class. And because she was the only crew member who'd interacted directly with Leo and his father, the spotlight landed squarely on her. She knew how these things worked. Airlines hated bad press, especially from high-profile passengers. A complaint like this wasn't just about one flight. It was about contracts, partnerships, brand image. And when big money was involved, people like her were often the first to take the fall, even if they weren't entirely at fault. 2 mornings after she got back, her phone buzzed with a message from crew scheduling. Please report to the operations office at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Dress code, business casual. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a routine check-in. This was official. She spent the night tossing and turning, running through every possible scenario. Would they suspend her? Fire her? Make her retrain? She'd never had a single disciplinary mark in over a decade. She'd received thank you notes from passengers, commendations from supervisors, but none of that mattered now. One complaint from the right person could erase it all. The next morning, she put on her best blazer, the one she saved for interviews, and walked into the airline's downtown office with her shoulders squared and her breath steady. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and printer toner. The waiting area was quiet, just a few other crew members flipping through magazines or scrolling on their phones. No one looked at her. No one said a word. When her name was called, she followed a manager down a hallway lined with framed photos of planes and smiling flight crews. They entered a small conference room with a long table and 2 bright lights. 2 people sat on the far side, her base manager and someone from corporate compliance she'd never seen before. Thanks for coming in, her manager said, voice neutral. We wanted to talk to you about the incident on Flight 227. Clara nodded. Of course. They asked her to recount what happened step by step. She did, calmly, honestly, without excuses. She explained how Leo had been acting out, how his father had been distracted, how she'd tried to de-escalate before things got physical. She admitted the tap was a mistake, even if it came from a place of trying to keep everyone safe. The compliance officer took notes without looking up. Her manager leaned back, arms crossed. Mr. Reeves didn't mention any physical contact, the manager said finally, but he did say the cabin felt uncontrolled, that his son was frightened, that no one offered real support. Clara swallowed. I tried. I really did. I gave Leo activities, snacks, comfort. I spoke to him gently, but I was the only one engaging with them. His father didn't ask for help, and I didn't want to overstep. The manager sighed. We understand it's a tough situation, but first-class passengers expect more than trying. They expect seamless service, especially someone like Reeves. There was a long pause. Then the compliance officer spoke for the first time. Effective immediately, you're placed on administrative leave pending full review. You'll keep your benefits, but you won't be scheduled for any flights until further notice. Clara's throat tightened. She'd expected it, but hearing it out loud still hit like a punch. Is there anything else I can do? She asked quietly. Just wait, the manager said. And don't speak to the press or post about this online. Not even to friends, she nodded. Of course, silence was part of the deal. Back outside, the city felt louder, brighter, almost too real. She walked for blocks without direction, her thoughts racing. She wasn't angry, at least not at Reeves. In his shoes, she might have done the same. He was protecting his son, and he had the power to demand better. No, her anger was at the system. The impossible expectations, the lack of support for crew dealing with real human moments in a space designed to feel perfect and sterile. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. She thought about Leo, his wide eyes, his sudden stillness after the tap, the way he'd nodded at her later like they'd made peace. She thought about his father's quiet thank you as he left the plane. Maybe he hadn't meant for this to go this far. Maybe he just wanted the airline to do better, but intentions didn't change outcomes. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen. Then slowly she began to type. Not a defense, not an excuse, but a letter. She wrote about the pressure of long-haul flights, the fatigue that builds in your bones, the constant need to read a room and adjust in seconds. She wrote about how she loved her job, how she believed in kindness and safety above all. She admitted her mistake plainly without drama, and she asked not for her job back but for understanding, for context to be considered, not just the headline. She didn't send it to HR. She didn't send it to her manager. She addressed it to Daniel Reeves himself. She found a general contact form on Viridian's website and pasted it there, with no expectation of a reply. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about saying clearly and honestly, "This is who I am." Days passed. No calls, no emails, just silence. She filled her time with walks, old movies, calls to her sister. She avoided aviation forums, news sites, anything that might mention Viridian or airline complaints. She needed space to breathe. Then, on the 5th day of leave, her phone rang. Unknown number she almost didn't answer. But something made her press accept. "Is this Clara?" A man's voice asked. Calm, familiar. Her breath caught. "Yes, this is Daniel Reeves." She froze. "Oh, I got your letter." She didn't know what to say. I didn't think you'd read it." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But something made me open it." He paused. She could hear faint keyboard clicks in the background. Probably in his office, somewhere high above the city. "I read it 3 times, he said finally. "You didn't blame me. You didn't make excuses. You just told the truth." She exhaled slowly. "Because it is the truth." Another pause. "Longer this time. Leo asked about you," he said quietly. "Last night out of nowhere. He said, 'Was that lady mad at me?' I told him no. And he said, 'She just wanted me to be safe.'" Clara's eyes stung. She blinked fast. "I've been thinking a lot about that flight," Reeves continued. "I was so wrapped up in work I didn't see how overwhelmed he was, or how hard you were trying. I filed that complaint out of frustration, but it wasn't fair." She didn't respond. She didn't want to say the wrong thing. "I'm not calling to fix your job," he said. "That's not my place. But I will withdraw the complaint. And I'll tell your airline that I believe you're a good person who had a hard moment." Tears spilled over then, silent and hot. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," he said. "For writing. For caring enough to explain." They hung up a minute later, no grand promises, no dramatic closure, just 2 people acknowledging a shared moment of humanity. The next morning, an email arrived from HR. Subject: Update on administrative review. The complaint had been withdrawn. The investigation was closed. She was cleared to return to duty. But nothing felt the same, because now she knew. The sky wasn't just about safety procedures and service standards. It was about people, messy, tired, trying their best. And sometimes the smallest gesture, a tap, a letter, a child's quiet words, could change everything. The email from HR said she was cleared to return, but it didn't say how. No fanfare, no apology, no explanation, just a dry line. "Your status has been updated. Please contact scheduling to resume flying." Clara read it 3 times, waiting for relief to kick in. It didn't. Instead, she felt hollow, like she'd been handed back her job but not her confidence. She called scheduling the next morning. The voice on the other end was cheerful, impersonal. "Great to have you back. We've got you down for a short domestic run tomorrow. Boston to Chicago. Economy only for now, economy only for now." The word stung more than she expected. After 12 years flying international, often in premium cabins, being moved to the back of the plane felt like a demotion, even if no one called it that. But she didn't argue. She just said, "Thank you," and hung up. That night, she laid out her uniform like she always did. The crisp white blouse, the navy blazer with the airline's wings stitched neatly on the lapel. She polished her shoes, checked her ID, packed her small roller bag. Routine used to calm her. Tonight, it felt like armor. The next morning, she arrived at the airport 2 hours early, as required. The terminal was already buzzing. Travelers dragging suitcases, kids clutching stuffed animals, couples arguing over gate changes. She walked through it all like a ghost, invisible in her uniform. Just another crew member heading to work. Her new crew didn't know her. They were friendly enough, offered coffee, asked where she'd been flying, but she kept her answers short. Just got back from leave. No details. No drama. She didn't want pity. She didn't want gossip. The flight itself was uneventful. A smooth takeoff. Light turbulence over Pennsylvania, a quiet cabin. She served drinks, handed out snacks, checked seatbelts. But every time she passed a child, her steps slowed. Every time a parent looked tired or overwhelmed, her chest tightened. She wanted to help, but she held back, careful not to overstep, careful not to assume. Halfway through the flight, a little girl, maybe 5, started crying softly in row 18. Her mother looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed, trying to soothe her while wrestling with a spilled juice box. Clara hesitated. Old her would have rushed over with extra napkins and a warm smile. New her paused, watching from a few rows away. Then she remembered Leo's voice. She just wanted me to be safe. She walked over. Rough day? She asked gently. The mother looked up surprised. You could say that. She's scared of flying. Clara knelt slightly. Hey there, she said to the girl. I used to be scared too. Want to know a secret? The girl sniffled but nodded. When the plane rumbles, it's just the clouds saying hello. The girl blinked. Really? Really, Clara smiled. And if you hold your stuffed bunny tight, the clouds can't hear you're nervous. The mother gave her a grateful look. Quiet, but real. Clara handed her a fresh napkin and an extra blanket. Let me know if you need anything else. Back in the galley, one of the other attendants raised an eyebrow. You're good with kids, Clara just shrugged. They're people too, but inside something shifted. She hadn't fixed anything. She hadn't even done much. But she'd connected, and that felt like a start. Over the next few weeks, she flew short hops, Chicago to Atlanta, Denver to Dallas, Seattle to San Diego. No first class. No international glamour. Just economy seats, recycled air, and the steady rhythm of takeoffs and landings. At first, it felt like punishment. But slowly, she began to see it differently. In economy, people were real. They talked to her. They asked how her day was. They apologized when their kids spilled drinks or kicked seats. They thanked her for the extra pretzels, for the warm towel, for remembering their coffee order. There was no expectation of perfection, just kindness and a little patience. She started offering it freely. If a parent looked lost, she'd quietly show them where the changing table was. If a teenager looked nervous, she'd joke about her own first flight. If an elderly passenger needed help with their bag, she'd lift it without being asked. Not because she had to, but because she remembered what it felt like to be seen. One rainy afternoon in Detroit, she spotted a young father struggling with a stroller, a diaper bag, and a wailing toddler. Without thinking, she stepped off the jet bridge after her own flight and helped him fold the stroller and carry his bags to the terminal exit. He kept saying, "You don't have to do this," but she just smiled. "I know, but I want to." It wasn't about making up for what happened. It was about remembering why she'd loved this job in the first place. Not the fancy cabins or the layovers in Paris, but the human moments in between. Still, the shadow of that flight lingered. She avoided first class when she passed through terminals. She flinched when she saw Viridian logos on business travelers' laptops. And once, when a passenger snapped at her for bringing the wrong kind of crackers, she froze for a full second, heart racing, hands trembling, before forcing a calm reply. She wasn't broken, but she was changed. Then came the call from her base manager. "We're putting you back on International," they said. "Next month." London again, her breath caught. First class? A pause. Not yet. Premium economy. But it's a step. She said yes before she could second-guess herself. The night before that flight, she sat on her balcony again, watching planes trace silver lines across the dark sky. She thought about Leo, how he'd looked at her after the tap, not with fear but with curiosity. She thought about his father's quiet thank you and his even quieter phone call weeks later. She thought about the letter she'd written, not to save her job, but to say, "This is me." Flawed, but trying. She wasn't the same person who'd boarded that red-eye all those weeks ago. She was more careful, yes, but also more compassionate, more aware that everyone, even CEOs and toddlers and tired flight attendants, is just doing their best in a world that rarely gives second chances. But sometimes, if you're honest and humble and willing to listen, it does. The next morning, she put on her uniform again, not as armor but as a promise. To herself, to the passengers, to the sky. And when she walked down the jet bridge, rolling her bag behind her, she didn't look back. Months had passed since that red-eye to London, and the sharp edges of the whole ordeal had softened, like a bruise fading from purple to yellow, still tender if you pressed but no longer raw. Clara was back in the air regularly now, mostly on transatlantic routes, though still not in first class. She didn't mind. She'd grown to love the rhythm of premium economy, the mix of business travelers winding down and families stretching their budget for a little extra legroom. It felt honest, human. She'd also grown quieter in her work, not in a withdrawn way, but in a more thoughtful one. She listened more, watched more. She noticed the woman in 14C who kept checking her watch every 5 minutes, probably meeting someone at the airport. The man in 16A who flinched at every bump of turbulence, gripping his armrests like they were lifelines. The young couple in 12D and E whispering nervously. They'd never flown before. She didn't swoop in with solutions. She just made sure they knew she was there. One evening, on a flight from Boston to Dublin, she spotted a father traveling alone with a boy who looked about 4, same age as Leo. The child was fidgeting, pulling at his seatbelt, asking for snacks in a voice that was already tipping toward frustration. The dad looked tired, distracted, glancing at his phone more than his son. Clara's stomach tightened for just a second. Old reflexes. But then she took a breath and walked over. "Hey there," she said, crouching slightly. "Long day?" The dad looked up, surprised. "You could say that." "Missed his nap," she nodded. "I've got some coloring sheets and a few quiet toys if he'd like. And maybe a blanket to cozy up." The boy eyed her suspiciously. "Do you have dinosaurs?" "We do," she said, smiling. "One with a very silly hat," he grinned. That was all it took. She brought the activity pack, tucked a blanket around his legs, and gave the dad a quiet nod. "Let me know if you need anything." No judgment, just help. The man's shoulders relaxed. "Thanks, really." Later, during drink service, she saw him actually playing with his son, drawing together, laughing at the dinosaur's hat. It wasn't perfect. The boy still whined once or twice. But this time the dad was present, and Clara realized maybe that was all it ever took. Not perfection, just presence. She never mentioned the incident with Leo to anyone, not even her closest friends. It wasn't shame. It was respect. For herself, for the family, for the messy reality of being human in high-pressure spaces. But sometimes late at night she'd think about how one moment, one choice had rippled outward in ways she never expected. She never heard from Daniel Reeves again after that phone call. No follow-up, no grand gesture. And that was okay. His withdrawal of the complaint had been enough. More than enough. It had given her a second chance, not just with her job, but with her own sense of who she was. Then, one rainy Tuesday in the crew lounge at JFK, she opened her personal email during a layover. Buried between grocery store ads and airline updates was a message with no subject line. The sender's name made her heart skip. D. Reeves. She almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. Inside was just a short note. "Clara, Leo starts kindergarten next week. He packed his toy airplane in his backpack to show his teacher how nice flight ladies are. I thought you'd like to know. DR. No flourish. No apology. Just a quiet update, like passing news over a fence to a neighbor." She read it 3 times. Then she closed her laptop, leaned back in her chair and smiled. Really smiled for the first time in a long while. It wasn't closure. It was something better, continuity. Life moving forward, stitched together by small acts of decency. Back in the air, things kept changing, slowly, steadily. The airline rolled out new training modules on de-escalation and family support in premium cabins. Clara was asked to help review them. She suggested adding real scenarios, not just scripts, like what to do when a parent is overwhelmed or when a child is scared or when you're the only one noticing. They listened. She also started mentoring newer crew members, not officially, just over coffee in the galley or during layovers. She told them the truth. You can't control every situation, but you can always choose kindness. Even when you're exhausted. Even when you're scared. Especially then. One new attendant asked her once, "Aren't you ever afraid of messing up?" Clara thought about it. "All the time," she said. "But messing up doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. What matters is what you do after." She never returned to first class. Not because she wasn't allowed, she was. But because she didn't need to. She'd found her place in the middle rows where life was louder, messier, and more real. Where a juice box spill wasn't a crisis, just a moment to connect. Where a tired parent's grateful nod meant more than a champagne toast. And sometimes, when the cabin lights dimmed and the plane hummed through the night sky, she'd look out the window at the stars and think about how fragile everything was. Careers, reputations, trust. But also how resilient. How one honest word, one small gesture could stitch things back together. She still flew red-eyes. Still skipped meals during delays. Still dealt with rude passengers and broken coffee machines. But now when a child cried or a parent looked lost, she didn't hesitate. She walked over. She knelt down. She offered water, a blanket, a quiet word, not because she had to, but because she remembered what it felt like to be on the other side. Scared. Alone. Hoping someone would see you not as a problem, but as a person, and in those moments, high above the earth with the world sleeping below. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not perfect, not flawless, but trying. Every single day, time has a way of smoothing out the sharpest corners of our lives. What once felt like a crisis, something that could shatter a career, redefine a person, slowly becomes just another chapter, folded into the larger story of who we are. For Clara, the incident on that red-eye to London never disappeared, but it stopped being the center of her story. It became a turning point, not a tombstone. She kept flying season after season, crossing oceans and time zones, watching cities blink awake below her as dawn broke over the Atlantic. The airline never formally promoted her back to first class, and she never asked. She'd found something deeper in the middle of the cabin, connection. Not the polished, transactional kind that came with champagne flutes and monogrammed blankets, but the real, messy human kind that happened when someone was tired, scared, or just needed to be seen. One spring afternoon, she was working a flight from Chicago to Lisbon, a long route, but one she'd come to love for its mix of families, solo travelers and retirees chasing sunshine. Midway through the meal service, she noticed a woman in premium economy sitting alone, staring out the window with red-rimmed eyes. Her tray was untouched. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Clara didn't hover. She just made a mental note. Later, during a quiet moment, she brought over a fresh cup of tea, no sugar, no milk, just how she liked it when she needed comfort, and set it gently on the woman's tray table. "No rush," Clara said softly. "But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." The woman looked up, surprised, then nodded once, just enough to say thank you without words. An hour later, as the cabin dimmed for rest, the woman stopped Clara in the aisle. "My husband passed last week," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "This was supposed to be our trip." "I couldn't cancel it, so I came alone." Clara didn't offer empty platitudes like he's in a better place or time heals. She just said, "That takes courage." The woman's eyes filled again, but this time she smiled faintly. It feels less heavy when someone acknowledges it. That exchange stayed with Clara long after the flight landed. It reminded her that everyone carries invisible weight. The CEO with his tired son, the widow on a dream trip gone quiet, the new parent drowning in exhaustion. Even herself on that long night when fatigue blurred the line between discipline and impulse. She began to see her role differently, not just as a server of drinks and safety demonstrator, but as a quiet witness to the human condition at 35,000 feet. And in that role, she found a kind of peace. Back home, she started volunteering one weekend a month at a local community center that helped families preparing for their first international trips. Refugees, adoptive parents, seniors reuniting with relatives abroad. She taught them what to expect. How to ask for help on a plane, where to find water, how to calm a nervous child. She didn't wear her uniform, but people always guessed she worked in aviation. "You have that calm about you," one woman told her. Clara just smiled. "I've learned that kindness is the best language no matter where you're flying." Then one ordinary Tuesday, she received an unexpected invitation. The airline's leadership team was hosting a small roundtable on human-centered service in premium travel, and they wanted her to speak. Not as a manager, not as a trainer, but as someone who'd lived through the gap between policy and people. She almost said no. Public speaking wasn't her thing, but then she thought about Leo, about the widow, about all the passengers who just needed someone to see them. So she said yes. The meeting was held in a sunlit conference room at headquarters. Executives in crisp suits sat alongside crew leads and customer experience designers. When it was her turn, Clara didn't read from notes. She just spoke from the heart. "I used to think good service meant everything running smoothly," she said. "No spills, no noise, no disruptions. But I've learned that real service isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about noticing when someone's drowning in silence and offering a hand before they have to ask." She told them about the flight with Leo, not to excuse what happened, but to show how a moment of stress, combined with a lack of support, can spiral. She talked about how a simple acknowledgement, "You're doing your best," can change everything for a struggling parent. She suggested small changes, training crew to recognize signs of parental overwhelm, creating a discreet signal system for when a family needs help, even just keeping extra quiet toys in premium cabins. To her surprise, they listened. Really listened. Within weeks, a pilot program launched on select long-haul routes. Clara was asked to help design it. She never became a manager, never moved to an office. She stayed in the sky where she belonged. But now, when she walked down the aisle, she felt like she carried more than just a service cart. She carried the weight and warmth of all the people she'd met along the way. Years later, on a routine flight from New York to Paris, she spotted a familiar face in first class. A man, older now, gray threading through his temples, sitting beside a boy who looked about 10, tall, confident, wearing a t-shirt with a rocket on it. The boy leaned over and said something that made his father laugh. Clara's breath caught. It was him. Daniel Reeves. And Leo, now a young man with steady eyes and a calm demeanor. She didn't approach them right away. She finished her service round, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. When she finally walked past their row, Leo looked up and recognized her instantly. His eyes widened. "Hey," he said, smiling. "You're the flight lady." She paused. "I am." He turned to his father. "Dad, it's her." The man looked up. His expression softened. "Clara," he said, like he'd been expecting her all along. She nodded. "Good to see you both." There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a quiet understanding that passed between them like a shared secret. Later, during drink service, Leo came back to the galley himself, something first-class passengers rarely did. "I still have the dinosaur with the hat," he said, leaning against the counter. "It's on my desk," she laughed softly. "Glad it survived." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you get in trouble?" She met his gaze. "For a little while, but it worked out." He nodded, thoughtful. "I told my teacher about you. She said you were brave." "Brave?" Clara asked, surprised. For caring even when it was hard. She didn't know what to say to that. So she just handed him a juice box, apple, like before, and said, "You've grown up kind. That's on you, not me." He grinned, maybe a little on both. When the flight landed in Paris, Reeves stopped her near the exit. "You changed how I travel," he said quietly. "Now I put my phone away. I watch him. I listen. That's all any of us need," she replied. He extended his hand. She shook it. No grand speeches. No promises. Just two people who'd crossed paths in the sky and left each other better. Back in New York, weeks later, Clara received a small package at her apartment. No return address. Inside was a framed photo, black and white, taken from an airplane window at sunrise, clouds glowing gold below. On the back, in neat handwriting, "For the lady who taught my son that kindness has wings." She hung it in her kitchen, where she could see it every morning with her coffee. She never flew first class again. But she didn't need to. She'd found her place, not in the front of the plane, but in the space between people. where real connection happens. And in that space, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years from now, when she finally hung up her wings and retired, she wouldn't remember the long hours or the delays, or even the scary moments. She'd remember the quiet nods, the whispered thanks, the children who smiled when she walked by. She'd remember that one tap, not as a mistake, but as the moment she learned that being human isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise, how you listen, and how you choose to show up the next time. And every time she boarded a plane after that, she carried that lesson with her. Light as a carry-on, strong as steel.